One of the best things I've ever eaten can be found in Bangkok's Sathorn District at a bicycle cart secured in front of a small shop house on a quiet alley. It's a throwback to a different time, back when there were no grocery stores or factories, and if you wanted to make something, you'd have to do it from scratch. There was once a neighborhood here, a small village of immigrants that served this dish to old Bangkok, a place that would be called Noodle Alley. But of the dozens of shops that once stood here, this is the last one standing. And the reason it's survived is their meticulous technique, their ancient family recipe, and most of all, bodybuilding? The perfect bowl of noodles starts with a handful of egg noodles, dense and toothsome and served al dente. They're blanched together with homemade wontons, light and delicate and stuffed with a mixture of minced pork and seasoning, then gailan or Chinese broccoli. Red pork, seasoned, marinated, and honey glazed, then grilled over coals, and to make it just astronomically better, there's a pan that collects those juicy drippings while the meat's cooking, and that's this. Spooned over the noodles, then followed by some rendered pork fat cooked with garlic, and a big scoop of those crispy bits of fatty heaven. It's not a bold flavor, it's not spicy or sour or salty, it's actually pretty simple. It's just perfect. So, the first time we came here, we knew the story of the owner, which we're going to tell you in a little bit, and that by itself was enough reason for this to be something that we wanted to cover in a video. We didn't think that this would be something that we would make a video by itself until I tried these, and this is the best bowl of noodles that I've ever had in my life. And let me say that again slower. This is the best bowl of noodles that I have ever had in my life. It's noodles cooked in lard. It's perfect homemade noodles cooked in rendered pork fat. That's all it is, and it's perfect. Jasper, I don't know how long we've been rolling tape. I think it's been like 45 seconds. Now, there's a lot to unravel with this story, but first it needs a little bit of background. The dish prepared here and all over the world is called wonton noodles, and the classic form calls for three primary components brought into perfect harmony. The noodles, the broth, and the wontons are folded wrappers stuffed with shrimp or pork or both. The first record of this, or something like it, comes from a poem written 2,000 years ago in China. And that's actually not relevant to the story at all, but it is a fun fact, at least to me, that the poet who wrote this was stationed in Xi'an at the time of his writing, and it was in Xi'an around that same general time period when work was completed on a project that today we call the Terracotta Army. So there's a chance, I mean, it's not necessarily probable, but there's a chance that maybe the workers who built what's often called the eighth wonder of the world were eating this stuff on their lunch breaks. Anyway, what is relevant to this story is that by the 17th century, wonton noodles in generally the same form that we find them today had caught on and become popular in a southern Chinese city called Guangzhou, known in the West as Canton. Now to keep this moving, I'm going to skip about 300 years of proud Cantonese history, sorry Steph, and pick it up in the year 1938 when the Japanese have started their invasion of mainland China. And while the fiercest battles were being fought in the north, the Chinese army was relying on a supply of weapons, food, and clothing that arrived by way of the port of Guangzhou. So the Japanese started bombing the city, then bombing some more. They bombed houses and temples, railway stations, and wet markets. A lot of people died, and many more left. At the start of 1938, Guangzhou had a population of 1.3 million, and by the end of the year, it had been cut in half. The refugees would settle in Hong Kong, Malaysia, and Indonesia, the United States, and right here, in Bangkok. And in Bangkok, in that refugee community, well, that's where our story starts.
ค่ะนี่แต่ก่อนนี้เป็นบ้านไม้ค่ะแล้วก็มีหนองน้ำมีหนองน้ำแล้วก็จะเป็นบ้านเช่าซะมากกว่าไม่ใช่เป็นตึกอย่างนี้บ้านเช่า2ชั้นอะไรอย่างเงี้ยแล้วก็ห้องน้ำห้องเดียวแล้วก็ห้องอาบน้ำก็รวมอย่างเงี้ยมันก็ค่อนข้างลำบากนะต้องเอาถังมาลองทีละถังกว่าจะยกออกมาเทใส่หม้อขายของเงี้ยต้องตื่นแต่เช้ามาลองก๊อกน้ำก็ก๊อกเดียวนะสมัยก่อนห้องน้ำก็ห้องเดียวตื่นที่ไม่รู้อยู่กันได้ยังไงนะ
This is Chamasong, and her grandparents were among the hundreds who settled in Bangkok during the Japanese bombing in 1938. The family would move into a small wooden house just a few dozen meters away from where we sit today, in a cluster that would fill with Cantonese. Now, without speaking the Thai language, many of these new arrivals made their living by selling food. They brought their old traditions and techniques, including something never before seen here, the ancient way of making egg noodles. Basically, it's done by forming flour, water, and egg into a dough and then activating the gluten without softening the texture by, I don't really have a better way to describe it, bouncing on a bamboo pole like you're riding a mechanical bull. It's physically exhausting, wildly time-consuming, and requires a precise knowledge of timing and texture to get it right. Nobody does it this way anymore. It's so rare that Bourdain flew all the way to Hong Kong to try it, from a market stall that also traces its roots to refugees from the Japanese bombing of Guangzhou. Anyway, the point is this dish became the specialty of this small neighborhood, and within a short time, this place would become known as Egg Noodle Alley. Now the crazy thing is, even though those old houses have long since been demolished and Egg Noodle Alley is all but forgotten today, there are still a few blocks on the outskirts of the district that remain intact, and we were there just a few weeks ago, walking around with Bangkok Pat. And seeing the houses, we can imagine what it must have looked like in its heyday. Those old structures echoing with the sounds of men jumping on bamboo poles, everything smelling of grilled meat and a dozen pots of boiling pork broth. And that is the environment that Chamasong was born into.
ช่วยตั้งแต่เด็กๆแต่ก่อนมีลูก4 คนแม่แล้วบอกว่าทำไมเรียกแต่ฉันนะ3 คนที่นอนอยู่ทำไมไม่เรียกช่วยทำหมูช่วยทำเกี๊ยวช่วยอะไร3 คนไม่เห็นเรียกเลยเรียกคนเดียวทำไมเขาก็ไม่ตอบแม่ก็ไม่ตอบ
I'm going to taste the broth real quick before I mix it all together. I just want to try the broth plain. This is just so good. In the 1940s, this dish, wonton noodles with pork broth soup, this was beloved all across Bangkok. Vendors like Chamasong's grandparents would prepare everything early in the morning and then load a giant pot of soup and all the ingredients onto the back of a bicycle cart and pedal around Siloam in Sathorn, Taladnoy in Chinatown, selling bowls for about a penny a portion. Back then, Bangkok was a different city, and that applies to the food too. There were no tourists clamoring for pad thai or workers on the go eating pad kapow. Cow gang counters hadn't been invented yet, and Isan food like somtam and grilled chicken hadn't found its way to the capital. But this became a common sight. To draw customers, wonton soup vendors developed a technique of beating 2 blocks of wood together in a rhythmic pattern. They'd bang out a song, pok pok, pok pok, while shouting ba mi, the Thai word for egg noodles. So Thai locals would give the dish a name, ba mi pok pok. The local merchants would thrive and begin to build a life in Bangkok. But the heyday of Egg Noodle Alley wouldn't last long. There's no one single reason why this disappeared. There were the city's changing tastes and demographics, the financial reality of a new generation of Cantonese raised speaking Thai, moving on to better paying jobs, and the fact that in the days of automation and with the spread of grocery stores and organized markets, every component could simply be purchased instead of made from scratch. Whatever it was, the city moved on from wonton noodles. Now, Chamasong's grandparents would raise 6 children at their house in the alley, and the first to be born in Thailand would be named Ngao Gao Tananon. He would be born in 1941 and grew up helping his parents make their noodles. His siblings helped out too, and like most of the neighborhood kids, they did it because they were supposed to, while dreaming of doing something maybe a little less arduous. Well, at least that was the case for most of them, because even at a young age, Ngao loved everything about the process. He loved grilling the pork, jumping on the bamboo pole to make the noodles, and riding around the neighborhood on the bicycle cart. But most of all, he loved running to the market every morning and hauling sacks of flour back to the house. He wanted to be the one to fetch the water from the tap. Something about the physical challenge of so much labor spoke to Ngao. He got stronger and stronger. Around Sathorn, he earned the nickname Big Muscles, and one day while riding on his route, a customer invited him to visit his gymnasium, the first of its kind in the district. And just as traditional wonton noodles were fading in popularity and some businesses closed up shop, by the 1960s all across the city, customers would wait outside to try the specialty of the TV star, the celebrity, the strongest man in Thailand. In the 1880s, a German named Eugene Sandow joined a carnival sideshow as a strongman, lifting other performers and doing the things that strong people do. But Sandow was unique. He was obsessed with lifting weights and ate incredible amounts of protein, and even though his role was supposed to be support, the audiences spent more time watching him than watching the performance. So he became the act. Over the next 10 years, he'd travel across England and the United States, selling tickets to shows where spectators could gawk at his physique. He was the first to make a living this way and is known as the father of bodybuilding. It was Sandow who organized the first bodybuilding competition in London in 1901, where it was judged by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And in 1903, the new sensation would come to America, where the first public performance was held at Madison Square Garden. It would be won by Al Treloar, who was immediately hustled to West Orange, New Jersey, to be videotaped by Thomas Edison. The sport would grow in popularity, and celebrity bodybuilders, men like Charles Atlas, would star in movies and Broadway shows. One of Atlas's fans was a missionary school graduate who watched Atlas perform at Coney Island, and then took his new passion back with him to his hometown, which was, of course, Guangzhou, China. His name was Zhao Zhuguang, and he would start a bodybuilding club at Huijiang University, the first appearance of the sport anywhere in Asia. In 1934, Zhao would publish a book written in Chinese called Ji Rou Fa Da Fa, or How to Develop Muscles. Now, as the sport would explode globally with the first Mr. Universe contest held in 1950, China would ban bodybuilding for reasons known only to Mao Zedong. But within the overseas Chinese diaspora, young weightlifters who dreamed of one day winning their own trophies read Zhao's book religiously, including a young man who spent his mornings hauling sacks of flour and making egg noodles, right here in Bangkok. From the time he was a teenager, Ngao would spend every free minute following Zhao's advice and sharing it with the others in Sathorn's underground bodybuilding community. Here in this neighborhood, there was a small group who would take turns hosting workouts. Each day, the devotees rotating houses where they'd lift weights together and eat an enormous amount of eggs and butter. Ngao would start his day early in the morning, using the bamboo pole to make egg noodles while his mother prepared the wontons. Then he'd go to the market to buy whatever the family needed and carry it all home. He'd bring buckets of water from the tap to fill up the soup pot. And then his mother would let him go, and he'd spend the afternoon exercising before coming home to do more work. By the time he started a family of his own, including in 1967 a daughter, Chamasong, the family business was now his to run. But he'd also started to gain attention, winning competitions and then winning bigger competitions, and then becoming something of a star on national TV. Thailand's first celebrity bodybuilder.
เขาเรียกว่าชายงามเพราะว่าเวลาพ่อจะได้รางวัลอย่างเงี้ยรางวัลที่1เนี้ยก็จะแบบจะได้ถ่ายรูปคู่กับสาวงามประจำจังหวัดนั้นที่เวลาไปแข่งชลบุรีไปแข่งเชียงใหม่ก็จะคู่กับถ่ายสาวงามเชียงใหม่แล้วก็ได้ถ้วยรางวัลอย่างเงี้ยก็สนุกสิคะสนุกพ่อเล่นกล้ามอย่างเงี้ยสนุกดูพ่อแข่งสนุกมากเขาเล่นกล้ามเขาการนี่เขาเล่นทุกส่วนเขาเล่นตั้งแต่คอยันเท้าอะไรเงี้ยเขาเล่นทุกส่วนเงี้ยสมัยที่หนุ่มๆนะเล่นทุกส่วนหล่อมาก
It's been a few years since this sign has stood next to the Bami Pok Pok cart. At some point in the year since Chamasong and the family moved to the new house, the lights stopped working, so now it sits inside, away from public view, buried under a lifetime of accumulated stuff. But when we asked her to bring it out for us to take a few photographs, she decided to leave it up. For at least one evening, it would sit in its rightful spot. The sign, which says Muscle Noodles, was a gift to Ngao from his granddaughter, and it was one of the only things he'd ever receive in honor of his years of hard work and his stature in the sport. There was no money in bodybuilding. This back then was truly a labor of love. Ngao would have to pay his way to competitions, and he'd also bring his children along too. And even when he was known by every weightlifter in Thailand, he never had a chance to compete overseas as that was just too expensive in the days of competing without support or sponsorships. But what it did do for him was bring enough attention here in Bangkok that his wonton noodles kept selling. And as every other vendor from the once proud Egg Noodle Alley faded away, well, he just kept on going, carrying on with the exact recipe his parents brought from Guangzhou, making something that's irreplaceable and just so unbelievably good. But all of it, the weightlifting and the noodle making, well, it came at a cost. By the time he reached his mid-70s, Ngao's body would start to break down. First his leg would go, and then his back. It got so bad that around 2018, this street cart, for the first time in 80 years, would close. But then, something miraculous happened. When COVID struck in 2020 and businesses and offices shut down, Ngao's 4 children, along with cousins, nieces, and nephews, all of whom had scattered since the destruction of Egg Noodle Alley, well, they found themselves back together again under the same roof. And the family decided that they would help and revive the family business. They started making the dishes again, all of them, of course, familiar with their father's recipe. They reopened the restaurant and kept the traditions alive. And that wasn't the only thing that would happen. With time to rest for the first time in his life and 5 months of medical treatment, Ngao recovered. He doesn't work long hours anymore, but for at least a part of every day, 75 years after he started helping out in his parents' kitchen, Ngao is now once again back behind the cart he once drove, serving the best noodles that I've ever tasted.
ไม้ไผ่ไงเคาะเสียงว่าบะหมี่เกี๊ยวมาแล้วเป๊กปักเป๊กปักเป๊กปักปักปักปักปักปักปักปักเป๊กก็สมัยขายขี่กลางวันน่ะขายอ่ะสมัยนั้นก็ยังเล่นกล้ามอยู่แล้วก็ขี่รถคันนี้ไปขายกลางวันเด็กๆมันก็บอกบะหมี่นักกล้ามมาแล้วก็เล่นกล้ามออกทีวี
Ngao today is 81 years old. He still makes the noodles by hand each morning, although he uses a machine now instead of the bamboo pole. But that's literally the only thing that's changed, as a man used to lifting heavier stuff than anyone else now carries the weight of an entire way of life.
เรียนจากพ่อแล้วก็ข้างบ้านก็ทำเหมือนกันบ้านเก่าทีนี้ก็ไปกันหมดแล้วอันไหนว่ารูปปลาว่าธนบุรีกรุงเทพมหานคร
อ
อันไหนอันนี้เปล่า
ป้าอยู่คนนี้ นี่อาป้า
เพราะใจมันรักตั้งแต่สมัย10 กว่า 18 19อะไรอย่างเงี้ยรุ่นใหญ่มันเล่นกันรุ่นโตๆแถวบ้านเขาเล่นกัน แล้วก็ไปเล่นกับเขาตามบ้านตามอะไร ตอนหลังเราก็89ก็โตหน่อยแล้วก็ทำงานทำการก็ไปเข้ายิมเล่นเลยสมัคร เล่นที่ยิมก็เล่น มันก็มีเครื่องมือครบหมดเลยเล่นมาหลายปีตอนนี้ที่ยิมก็มีหนังสือมาเรียนมาว่ายิมไหนส่งลูกศิษย์ไปแข่งก็ไปแข่งอย่างนี้ประกวดก็ไปฮะก็ไปบ้านนอกอย่างนี้นะต่างจังหวัดเนี่ยเขาเชิญมาก็ไป
เคยไปนอกประเทศไทยไหมครับเคยไหม
เมืองนอกเหรอเมืองนอกยัง
These days, Muscle Noodles opens later in the afternoon than in years past, around 3 p.m. But it's open, which is no small achievement after 80 years, 2 houses, and 3 generations. It's been a long time since wonton noodles were a Bangkok street food staple, and longer still since the family brought their recipe to Thailand. But thank goodness Ngao had the strength to keep going, literally. And his children and their children had the strength in their own ways to help him when he needed it. Because this stuff, you just don't find anything like this anymore. This place is a treasure. And if this is what we'd have found all across the city in the days of Egg Noodle Alley, I can only imagine how excited those lucky people must have been to hear the pock, 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 pock coming down the street. I love adding flavors. I'm a Sichuan chef, right? Like, I cooked in Indonesia. Like, what addicts me to food is just layering flavor. But the art of cooking is, can you make something this simple, this good? I can't. I don't know anybody else who can. I've never been anywhere else that can. To me, this is as, this is artistry. This is like, I guess I should talk less.
I'm done.
You're done. Subscribe to the channel for more from OTR. Please consider supporting us on Patreon. It's an enormous help, and thank you so much to those who do. Follow the links below for social media, and we'll see you next week.